Signing Day Live continues with the voice of the Badgers, Matt Lepay. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Man, it's been an education for me just trying to get to know some of these new coaches.
Yeah.
I guess it's starting to sink in now, the transition on this staff itself. My goodness.
It reminds me, signing day probably every year reminds me of Barry when he first got here in '90.
Oh, yeah.
And this year, in some ways, might be similar because they had to hit the ground running early January, put together a recruiting class. This is different in that, a lot of these guys have verbally committed a while ago, but the turnover is significant, and you're trying to keep things together. Brett's trying to hire a new staff and maintain the verbal commitments, and it looks like for the most part things are going to be okay in terms. Because I think people were fearing the worst with the turnover.
It's the sky is falling theory.
Sure. But when you think back of that first class, where was it ranked? Really low. Where did it turn out to be? Really high. So that's a trend that's really continued for the last couple of decades here. No matter where the recruiting analysts rank the class, at the end of the season, the ranking that matters is generally a lot higher.
And I do think there's some quality here too. And I'm going to go on the word of so many other analysts. I'm not going to put full stock in it, but I do believe there is some quality, if not quantity.
And you mentioned that because it's a smaller class, so it isn't going to be ranked as high. But when you hear the recruiting analysts, this is what they get paid to do. They're paid to judge what they think are going to be the stronger classes. And if they get ranked, and in the case of Wisconsin, if it's ranked lower, it's because of the number, because you're talking about a dozen guys here, give or take, as opposed to times two, where most of these higher classes are going to be.
Let me suggest too that I think most fans now are becoming more and more conditioned to understanding what recruiting day is all about with this program. Now, maybe in the past we could talk about, hey, don't worry about the rankings or the ratings. Worry about how those teams are built, develop, and finish. And I think it's sinking in now. If it hasn't after back-to-back Rose Bowls with recruiting classes that didn't have maybe the profile as others, then it should start sinking in.
You just spoke to Ben Strickland a few minutes ago, and you guys touched on, I think, a really key point in what has built, and maybe just as important or more important, what has sustained this program's strength is not just the four-star recruits or the occasional five-star. It's the guys who don't have as many stars, or guys who are walk-ons and become significant contributors, like a Ben Strickland, or this Abradaris kid turned out to be pretty good as a former walk-on. Now he's no longer a walk-on, but there's such a long line of that here, and I think most fans do understand that. Sure, every school in America would love to have nothing but 4 and 5 stars. That's not real. Wisconsin, without worrying about the number of stars, has done pretty well when it's mattered. They've become stars. They may not be stars when they walk on campus, but they become stars.
Throughout the morning, Matt, we've gone over some of the names on the list, and the latest to jump aboard being a quarterback, Bart Houston, and an offensive lineman, Walker Williams, both of whom I think have attracted attention outside of this community and state. We talk about high profile. They come here with high profiles.
We had a chance early in the season. I think Bart Houston's team was profiled, was showcased in one of those ESPN games, the high school games. So I think a lot of us were trying to steal a look and just see what he's all about. And here's we just talked about how you don't always get the guys with the high profile. Well, here's somebody who does have a high profile coming in. It'll be fun to watch Matt Canada work with him, new offense coordinator and quarterbacks coach. Watch him continue to develop. He was somebody that Wisconsin targeted a while ago, from what we understand, and I think a lot of other schools did. So this seems like a really good catch for them.
Yeah, talking with Matt Canada, he's already expecting the questions that everyone will bring up to him, and that who's the quarterback going to be?
Sure,
huh?
Sure.
Everybody wants to know that. Every year, returning quarterback or not, they're still wondering about the quarterback.
Didn't you get that when it was announced that Matt was going to be the new offensive coordinator? Oh, that's great, Matt Canada. Okay, who's quarterback?
Yep.
Is it it going to be how's Budmeyer doing? How's Kurt Phillips doing? And coming back from their
and they're
injuries?
good. They're legitimate questions.
Absolutely. Because look, this school has been Russell Wilson. Enough said, but they've been blessed with some really good quarterbacks.
Another
here.
Russell Wilson's going to fall out of the sky.
You never
know.
You never know. But what Scott Tolzien was pretty good, and
was.
before him, you had guys like Stocco and Tyler Donovan, and they've had a pretty good run of quarterbacks. Wilson was. We're talking about somebody extra special, but they've had quarterbacks, I think, here pretty consistently, who have been better than a lot of folks are going to give them credit for. They've won a lot of games, and the quarterback position had a lot to do with that.
And it seems to me, again, just in my brief exposure to Matt Canada, that he understands what works here, and that is knowing who you are and what you can do. And there are parameters for every program in the country. They change from program to program. And I think Wisconsin has its established boundaries for what it wants to do on offense.
I know, and this is the whole thing of this is the signing day and the guys coming in. But when you look to spring football here, it's going to be intriguing to see where Joe Brennan is in his development.
Sure.
Joel Stavi. I mean, he's somebody that you talk about under the radar in terms of the national profile or even a regional profile. And when he arrives on campus, his teammates are going, wow, look at this guy. So, I don't want to paint him out to be somebody who's going to put up record numbers here, but he's somebody who I think the coaches are really intrigued with, and they want to work with him and see how much better he can be. Brennan as well, and then when Houston gets here in the fall, it's young. We all know there's not much in the way, or little, if any, in the way of experience in a game setting. Joe Brennan has some. But, there are some quarterbacks here, and Stavi is somebody I think when you look in the spring ball, I know the coaches are eager to see what he can do.
Yeah, and beyond that position, the obvious, I want to see how the running backs are utilized. If we see, James White and Monty Ball in the same formation. Monty's kind of campaigned for that. As soon as the Rose Bowl was over with, he said he was talking with James, said, hey, we're coming back next year, we're going to be in the same backfield together. But you had a Melvin Gordon.
Yeah.
You've got a little depth there, I think. You got 4 tailbacks, really, that have shown that they got something they can give, something they can deliver, something they can bring to the table. And you're right, Jeff Lewis, I don't want to forget him. So I want to see how they get him in the mix.
Yeah, isn't it exciting? No matter who the quarterback is, you turn around and number 28 is going to be there. I mean, you talk, add him to the recruit. I mean, he could have been making himself available to the NFL draft, as we all know. But I think, too, you mentioned Lewis and Melvin Gordon. Those are 2 guys I think their futures are very exciting. Very, we had small glimpses of them this season. But to know you have Monty Ball back there, and when you throw the ball, you have Mr. Aberderis, you have Jacob Pedersen, the tight end position. You've got, those are pretty good places to start. They'll try to build and develop these younger guys at the wide out and the tight end positions, but those are two pretty good guys to throw to.
And I know they have to replace All-American at center in Cons and Zeitler and Oglesby, but I got a chance to meet Dan Volz.
Yeah.
I wrote a story for UWBadgers.com that will appear in Varsity, which you can read this week.
There you go.
And I was so impressed with Volz. Just first impression being, they reminded me of Travis Frederick. Education, very important. He was a 4-point student, recruited by everybody. I mean, he could have gone any place in the country. Among the late schools that jumped in on him, Alabama, Auburn. I mean, this is a high pro. We go back to that high profile thing. I want to see how he fits in. He's got the advantage, along with the 2 other kids. Etienne, I think is how you pronounce his name, I'm not sure, and Vontae Jackson's coming off the knee injury. We'll be here for spring ball. But we'll see if Volz can get into that group on the offensive line.
When you compared him to Frederick right away, going, oh, okay. Because remember how the impression that Travis made when he
played
arrived.
As a true freshman.
Yeah, right on
season
campus.
opener.
Yeah, and we all know how smart he is, how well-spoken he is, and has a little mean streak with him, maybe more than a little mean streak on the field. But you miss a guy like Peter Cons, but you know that Travis Frederick can slide in there. You have Ryan Groy, who got a lot of experience this past season. So you have, look, there's a tradition. We talk about the tailback position. There's a pretty decent offensive line tradition going, too. This time last year, you wondered how they were going to replace John Moffitt and Gabe Karimi. And this was an offense that, as good as the 2010 season was, in 11, they trumped it, which I don't know many people thought
you think
was
about
possible.
it. I mentioned 3 names, Zeitler and Oglesby and Cons, and you've got Havenstein and Wagner coming back. Ricky Wagner, who could be as good a tackle as there is in the Big Ten, if not the country. And then you just Ryan Groy, who got important snaps, along with Travis Frederick, who's shown his flexibility. Who knows who's going to be the offensive center when spring ball opens. But then you've got some other young players, and including this freshman, Dan Bowles. I think they'll be okay up front.
Yeah, I think so. Because the same questions were asked last year, and they turned out to be pretty good. And that's where spring ball, Mike. We've talked about some players, how important it'll be. I'm sure Brett would tell you that it's very important for this new coaching staff as well. He really, and he was right. When you look at the defensive staff last year, they had some new guys there, and they did a pretty good job of adjusting in the second half. Against some high-powered offenses, they may have given up some stuff in the first half, but they were able to tighten up, and he talked a lot about that. Now the offensive side of the ball is going to go through some changes here, obviously some new faces, but I think the spring practice period will be very important for these coaches to work together in working with the players. And you know this, coach, we like the games. We love the Saturdays, but I think coaches really love spring ball because they can teach the game. It kind of goes back to their roots, why they got into this business to begin with. They are teachers. They don't have the game pressure to be concerned with. They can just develop players, and I think coaches just love the spring practice sessions.
Another chapter in the book, Signing Day 2012. Thanks for joining me.